Hi everyone, Chris Collard here with the Off-Road Motorsports Hall of Fame. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be doing a roundtable deep dive discussion with my good friend Jim Bramham into the history of the California gold country and the gold rush. Now, Jim is an encyclopedia of knowledge. He's been on the OHV Commission in California. He was the president of Cal 4-Wheel Drive, American Sand Association, you name it, he's been there. Also joining us is going to be my other good friend, Del Albright, also a Hall of Famer and land use guy. And I need to give a big shout out to Metalcloak for allowing us to use their studio and their video crew to just have this great discussion today. So grab a cup of coffee. It's about an hour long, and just sit back and enjoy. Prepare to be edified on all things California gold country and gold rush. And thanks for joining us.
Welcome everyone, Del Albright here. I'm joined by some really distinguished guests with me, Mr. Jim Bramham and Chris Collard. We're going to take you in time today and travel back to the gold country of California. We're going to talk about the 1849ers, how California blossomed when this army of Argonauts came to California in search of gold. Our guest, Mr. Jim Bramham, is going to tell you his story of his family and how it became part of this history. But first, let's do some introductions. Chris?
Hey everybody, Chris Collard. I am a photographer and a writer. Jumped off the corporate bridge about 27 years ago to chase a dream, and it's been a fun ride. So Del knows that I've written and shot for just about every magazine and outlet. I was editor of Overland Journal, commercial photographer for the auto manufacturers, traveled across all 7 continents. This is a big fat I love me yarn right now. And it's been super fun. All of that kind of culminated in 2015. I was inducted into the Off-Road Motorsports Hall of Fame, right behind my good friend Del, I think the year before. And I met Jim on the Rubicon Trail, probably in the late 80s or early 90s. Just saw old CJ sitting there, and this lump underneath it with a sleeping bag dripped over it, and that was Jim sleeping on the ground. So on that, we're going to go to Jim.
On the ground?
On the ground.
Yep, on the ground, next to the Jeep.
Next to the Jeep. One of those moments when we were broken and needed to stay somewhere. So. Well, hi, I'm Jim Bramham. I introduce myself as has been everything just about when it comes to Cal 4-Wheel. I served as their president. I've served as their vice president. I've served as their natural resource consultant, chairman of Sierra Trek, chairman of multiple different events. And so I've pushed Cal 4-Wheel in different directions through the years in those positions. I went from there to being a commissioner on the California State Parks OHV Commission. From there, I decided to take a break from the internal politics of land use and went to actually go out and try to do something on the ground. Did a lot of work in the California desert on route designation. Went to Nevada, did what was called SNPLA, which was the area around Las Vegas. And then finally culminated with endangered species counts, where we had 60 young people hiking around the sand dunes at Glamis for 60 days. So when that all extended itself, I came back to the Cal 4-Wheel political life and the American Sand Association political life, and I've been on both of those boards on and off through the years. And now I'm kind of concentrating on just trying to introduce the West to some people who never understood the West, and I'm really glad for this opportunity. And all of that somehow I missed that word, didn't I?
Culminated?
Culminated, that would be the right word, thank you. Culminated in my induction into the Off-Road Motorsports Hall of Fame in 2018. So, awesome. Thanks.
And I'm Del, the land use guy. 30 some odd years ago, the reason we're here, Mr. Jim Bramham stuck his finger in my chest, said, you need to get involved. And I was sort of tiptoeing on the edges, and he basically pushed me off the fence. I got off the edge and started committing myself, dedicating myself to land use. I've been doing it ever since, keeping our trails open. That's all I think about day and night. But most importantly, I stand for sustainable motorized recreation. I don't care what you ride or drive, it needs to be sustainable and last into the future. So that's what I write about, blog about, stand for these days. And thanks to the nudge from Mr. Jim here. I'm also a combat vet from Vietnam, so freedom is precious to me, and the freedom to explore and to learn about our country is what Jim does with every ride, every trail, event he goes on. He shares that freedom, that knowledge of how we got to be where we are in this great country. So that's what I stand for. I was a 2014 inductee into the Off-Road Motorsports Hall of Fame. So you have 3 Hall of Famers here, which is pretty unique, and we're proud of that.
Mm-hmm.
And the good folks from the Hall of Fame are watching, or they will be watching, and blessed us with using their name and their logo in this movie. So thank you.
I'm going to jump in here, Del. So your induction was as a land use advocate.
Yes.
Advocacy, and as well as Jim.
Right.
So the guys that are in the background that most people never see, they never hear about, they never know, but you guys are the guys that are sitting in meetings, reading legislation, reading the fine print, and basically representing all of us while we're out in the backcountry, playing with our toys.
That's right. And the reason that Chris and I are here today with Jim, Chris has been following Jim forever. In fact, you mentioned to me that you might have some notes and materials from previous runs, Winter Fun Fest, Sierra Trek. Is that true?
That I do. I have a bunch of that stuff because Jim has, as Del said, Jim, you've always been like the history guy. So you've guided the historical run on Winter Fun Fest up in Grass Valley, and for years you've done the historic run on Sierra Trek. And you scared me to death a few weeks ago or a month ago because you called and said, Chris, I need you to do my historic run for me. I've got some other stuff I'm dealing with. And I'm like, oh my goodness, this is going to be, I hope nobody is a return client on that run because they won't be able to compare me to Jim, but share with us just a
I
little.
actually got some calls from people who were returnees and enjoyed your take. So thank you for
Nice.
picking that up and taking that for me this year. I'm looking forward to being back in that saddle again next year. So
I thought they'd be saying, well, that's not what Jim said.
yeah, that's not what Jim said.
I did the same thing. Jim asked me to take over his overnight run for Sierra Trek with the California Four-Wheel Drive Association. And I said, really? How do you step into shoes of somebody who's been doing it so long? But I did, and we took his overnight run and turned it into the good folks in the Trek committee. Let's make it a 2-night, 3-day overlanding trip and expand our reach beyond just the rock crawlers who want to do the Fordyce Trail. That sounds good to me. Turned out to be a huge success. I spent 40 hours a week, 3 weeks in a row studying Jim's notes so I could keep up. But we did it, and I can say this. After leading an overnight run with a bunch of people who are interested in history, the future is there, and Jim is creating that future. And Chris and I helped out, but
So Jim, I'm interested, and this is one of the things, we've known each other a long time. You've probably mentioned it, but sometimes I forget. And it's like, how did you get started from you've had an interest in the historical background, but you've got deep roots in the subject. Gold Country, tell us a little bit about that.
Well,
tell us a lot about that.
Tell us a lot about that. Well, my family was blessed with the ability to do a lot of traveling. My parents both were absolute history buffs. My father just wanted to know everything about everything. And so as a young child, I was drugged along to all kinds of interesting places that many people never get to see in their lives. And I was just recounting to my wife earlier today that before I was 10, I'd already been to the United States Capitol, the White House, the Smithsonian Institution, Boston Harbor, Yellowstone, and all over California. Everywhere there was California history, my father wanted to see. And with that interest, my mother's family was from Grass Valley, came from Cornwall, England to work the mines in Grass Valley. And so I had that Cornish connection in Grass Valley, Nevada County. And so the combination of that, I actually basically lived with the folks who were still or just coming out of the mines when they closed, and then the follow-up of that. So I learned a lot from that, and that just forced me into reading everything I could read and going to all of the places that I could go. And my father went from somewhat disinterested in off-highway vehicles to very interested, and because at that point that was about the only way you could get to most of these old mining communities in the Sierras. And so he bought himself a Scout, and away we went, and later we bought a Jeep, and so there it went. And that's kind of how I got going with it, and I've enjoyed sharing that. Education without sharing, as my father would say, was a waste. So if you know it and don't share it or use it, then it's gone. So it's important that you share. So I guess it comes down to my parents.
Yeah, you mentioned your mother and Grass Valley, but that history goes back into like the 49er days or the pioneers.
Pioneer days. On my mother's side, they were Cornwall English. And this is the folks that were from the very southern part of England. They had been mining there since BC for tin, copper, and later they found the clay that makes porcelain. So your porcelain pots, your porcelain dishes, the clay that they used for that in England to make all those beautiful porcelain pieces came from Cornwall as well. But that all started playing out in the beginning of the 1800s, and it was completely collapsed by like 1870, 1880. And so many of those miners who knew how to be in the ground, knew how to pump water, knew how to work together at great depths, how to stay underground for 12-hour shifts without panicking, those guys needed a new place to go. Many of them went to Australia, some went to South Africa, but when they found out that there was gold to be had in California, they came to California, and that's how that side of the family got here.
They knew how to pump water?
They knew how to pump water.
That's the famous
Cornish pump.
Okay.
So anywhere you dig in the ground deep enough, you're going to find water, and you got to get rid of that water if you want to dig deeper. So the famous line from England is that if there's a hole in the ground anywhere, there's a Cornishman at the bottom of it. So that's pretty much true. Cornish love to dig. And so they needed to get water out. Well, they didn't have electricity, and a water wheel didn't really work to pump well. So they figured out how to use the high pressure water to push low pressure water out of a mine, and a series of driven wheels to do the same thing. And so the Cornish pump was created to pump water strictly out of a no head pressure area. It wasn't drilling a well. It wasn't pumping it from a given source at the surface of the earth. All of this was to get water as deeply as possible out of a mine. And without Cornish pumps, none of the hard rock mining around the world would be possible. Now they have electric pumps, turn on a switch. The problem with that is it costs so much to run that electric bill now that it almost overcomes the price of the material you're getting out. Yeah. So, and that sent us into open pit mining and so on and so forth. But open pit gold mining, like they do in Nevada, is a completely different way of extracting gold. But the Cornish came here. What they wanted was to have the same kind of opportunities that they had in Cornwall, which was towns, cities, long-time employment, things that kept them as families and tight-knit units. And they found that in Grass Valley. They found mines that were operating that they knew were going to last. They knew the ore was going to last, and they were willing to put their lives at that, and they got paid back for doing that on a regular basis. So they weren't here like many of the gold seekers that were here just to go run, find some gold, and go to the bar. That wasn't not necessarily that the Cornish didn't go to the bar, but they built houses, they created streets, they had streetcars, they had street lights in Grass Valley, all because they had this desire. They knew community in England, and they wanted community here. And wow. Because of that, they became pretty much, if you're going to go into these mines, you're going to be Cornish. You can work the surface, anybody can work the surface.
I mean,
Other things that supported the
cultures,
mines, Irish,
German.
right, German, whatever. You could saw lumber, you could work the quarry, you could build buildings, you could do whatever that was ancillary and responsible for the mines. But the folks in the mines were the Cornish and the Canaries, and.
When Jim told me the first time he told me that story, I just got to say this. I use his information when I do tours like in Death Valley. I go with Modern Jeepr and do tours. And the Cornish and the Welsh, even in that area, they were famous for their cousin Jack. And I don't know if you were going to mention that, but
yes.
The cousin Jack was, every Cornish person who came over had family back in Cornwall. They wanted to bring them out to America, get the same benefits and the same treasures, right? So they would tell the rich mine owner or the operator that I have a cousin Jack that would come over. He's really good, Cornish pump, yada yada. It was just a way to get family. Same thing happened in Death Valley. The cousin Jack, they actually constructed a house, dug out in the banks, put a roof over it, maybe some front, and called it a cousin Jack. That was the name of that dwelling that the miners used. So
For a dugout.
In Australia.
Yeah.
I mean, they dig down in the ground, put a hut over the top of it, whatever it took, man.
all right, we're going to take a short break. What's that?
This is really fun to listen to.
Is
Making
good?
it up as we
It's
go.
really good. Don't forget about the Shoshone Indians.
What do you?
I'm kidding.
Oh, how they invented music? Did you want to hear that story again?
Here's what Jim here.
All right. Are you recording this? This is how the music was invented by the great Shoshone chief, standing on the bluff, looking over as people are watching. He says, "Can you hear that?" And they're all like, "What?" He said, "Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do." Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti. Anyway, he invented music. You haven't heard that
Guess
one
you had
yet.
to be there.
Do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. Music was invented right there.
Yes.
So back to the
So the
cousin
musical,
Jack.
right.
Can you cut this?
Absolutely.
Okay. So when the miners, Cornish and Welsh, came to the America, California especially, the world changed almost overnight in the mining community. And I asked Jim earlier to take us from the first settlers, the Argonauts who came out here in 1849, were picking up gold out of the creeks. Placer gold, that's called. Placerville, Placer County. So they were just picking it up, put it in their pocket, get rich. Well, that obviously ran out. I mean, it just got harder and harder. So what happened?
Hard rock or drift mining, one or the other.
And how does that?
But I want to go back just a little bit. The west coast of the United States was in a situation almost the exact same time that we were having an independence move back east, where we were trying to decide what the west coast, the world was trying to decide who was going to run the west coast of the United States. You had the Spanish here with all of their with all their missions. You had the Russians here that owned Alaska and most of the areas south of that. They came as far south as Fort Ross here in California because they needed agriculture. They made Fort Ross for agriculture because they can't grow certain crops up north. So they came down here, put that in, and discovered redwood trees and went, wow, those are really cool. And they stay together when you put them all wrapped up. And so we'll cut them down, float them down the rivers, and take them to Russia. And so most of your buildings, early buildings on the, what would that be, the east coast of Russia, were constructed with west coast redwood from Fort Ross. Then you add the British showed up, found the Columbia River, knew that there had to be all of this trading that was going to go on, and thus British Columbia and so on. So the coast at that time and in that era had just made decisions about what we were going to do for operational decisions. We didn't have any of the center states in the United States, so we had to determine what was going to be the border between Canada and the United States, the northern border, because there wasn't a North Dakota and a northern tip of Idaho or any of those. So they decided originally it was going to be the mouth of the Columbia River, so Seattle wouldn't have been in the United States. Oh no, we're going to go north. They finally picked a parallel, chose that parallel, and the Russians decided, man, we're fighting wars over here that we can't afford, so we need to sell something, so let's sell that stupid Alaska. They missed by 3 years. What was 1846? They sold Alaska to us. They could have had a gold rush, but they didn't. And the collapse of Spain caused them to no longer be able to support their activities in South America and in Mexico. And so the missions along the coast began to fail. And the presidios that accompany them, you had a mission, you had a presidio. You had a mission, you had a presidio. The mission obviously was the church. The presidio was the military to protect it. And so as the presidios fell apart, then the missions fell apart. So you had California at that time still under Mexican land grant. That's how the government had decided to run Mexico. The capital was in Monterrey, and you would come there and say, I'm rich enough to be able to make something out of land if you will give it to me. And they would get these land grants. And for those of you who are from Sacramento or understand that at all, John Sutter was one of those people who came and said, hey, I can make something out of this. Give me some land. He got the land grant at the confluence of the American and the Sacramento River. Up further north, up by Wheatland, there was another gentleman that and then Lassen up Vinum, and of course that's where Hearst Castle, that was a big land grant as well that Hearst ended up buying. But these were all these land grant areas, and when we became a state in 1850, they were accepted by the United States as part of that law. So you didn't lose those rights when we became a state. So most of if you go back to a title on a piece of property in Northern California, most of it goes back. Think who bought it, a Mexican land grant is how that happened. Anyway, you have Sutter, too nice a guy, but really wanting to build a town in Sacramento. He had chosen an area that had habitual flooding, but he needed lumber, so he sent James Marshall up to create a place to cut lumber and float it down a river and build Sacramento, or New Helvetia as he called it, because he was from Austria and wanted that. So you still see New Helvetia Cafe and so on downtown. James Marshall's up there, builds this sawmill. The design was a reciprocating saw. They would pull logs up there, saw them into rough timber, put them in the American River, and what survived the rapids, because of course there was no Folsom Lake or anything, so there was a series of rapids, and you could only float logs at certain times of the year when the water wasn't too high or too low. But he was all set to do that, and he turned the water off in his mill trace just to do some inspection work, and he was walking down the mill trace, and the rest is history from there. And there was gold in his mill trace, and he's like, that's kind of shiny. I ought to take that down to John Sutter and see what it is. And so
then that was in 1848.
1848.
And I think that it's kind of interesting that John Sutter, I mean, they did not want word to get out, because he was under the opinion that if people realized there was gold in the Sierras, it would ruin him, because he would lose all of his labor. Everyone would disappear. You would think it would be saying, hey, we're going to have a whole bunch of business and volume and people to settle on my land. But it was just the opposite. And word got out, and it was transmitted to the East Coast. And of course, the newspapers back there were dying to print anything interesting from the West. Yeah.
Exactly. And this, of course, was right past the Donner Party, who perished trying to get here before the gold rush, 1846. And so there's this big, intense understanding of travel across the country and how arduous it was for the Donners to get to California. And nobody wanted to be the next Donner Party, but they all wanted to come to California. They wanted to see this, but the secrecy was incredible. The same was true on the Yuba River up above here. Nobody wanted to say anything about how they had done. Downey was a sea captain who brought some folks from Hawaii and created Downeyville, but wouldn't let his sailors go back to San Francisco to tell anybody about the gold that they had found. So he put them to work, and so there's Kanaka Creek up there by Allegheny, named after those sailors, and Downeyville is obviously named after Downey. But there was but you had people from all over the world trying to migrate here. We still weren't a state. We're still under Mexican authority. As a matter of fact, that's how they got help for the Donner Party, in part, was by Mr. Reed, who went down and helped them win the Mexican-American War, and then got some of the American soldiers to come help him. But, there was no Nevada. There was no any of that. But I think my most fascinating point that I tell people on my trips is 1849. These people are lined up at the Missouri River and trying to get across the river to start their trip as fast as they could to California in 1849. By 1869, we're talking 20 years. 20 years later, they're pounding the Golden Spike for a railroad to connect the United States from one side of the country to the other. From not having anybody here and no workforce, and the workforce that showed up didn't want to work for anybody else but themselves, pretty much, other than to get grub staked, and came together with enough money nationally, became a state. Nevada became a state. The silver came. We fought a civil war, and we still, in 20 years, connected the United States together with a railroad.
It's almost hard to imagine in this day and age, the ingenuity, the determination back then. I wrote for the In Gear magazine, California Four-Wheel Drive Association. One of the stories that I got a lot of feedback on was, in Latin, it's Are Sacra Fames, the accursed hunger for gold. And that gold fever, when you've seen the movies, everybody knows about gold fever.
Sure.
It was
rampant.
Yes, yeah.
Rampant.
Wow. I think it's fascinating that you're talking about 1869, the completion of the railroad, 1849, the gold rush, or the 49ers. But if we go back just a few years, you go back into 1843, and I think that was the first reference of the term manifest destiny. It was in a newspaper, and I believe it was in Missouri or somewhere. An editor said, got this thing of manifest destiny, which caught on. The idea that America, which was 50 years old, or 60 years old, and it was coming up on a horrible civil war, but it was that this country is going to occupy everything between the Atlantic and the Pacific. And as that theory spread, the idea, 1843, that was the same year that Fremont crossed, finished his expedition and came down through the Black Rock Desert and first known non-Indian to see Lake Tahoe. A lot happened in a very short period of time.
Absolutely. So all of that, that period of time, if you back that up from 1869, like you say, back into the 1830s, that whole manifest destiny, Lewis and Clark, all of that, and how, what we're going to do with the West, and the idea that we're going to go settle it but not kill it, and we're going to use it to the benefit of the nation. That was what manifest destiny was about. And people got onto that, and away we went. You start back in Virginia with the idea that, these colonies are nice, but there's over that hill, there's some more country. Daniel Boone out there hacking his way over the hill, and I learned that word when I was in elementary school, and I always thought, wow, what does that mean? And by the time I was with my parents in 1962, so at that point I was 9 years old, and we were following part of that trail, the Daniel Boone Trail, and it's so overgrown that you can't even see it. And I realized it wasn't like out here where you need to put up a marker and a tree and a mark. you hacked your way across the Appalachian Mountains. I mean, you cut a deal. That's where the whole scribing trees and all of that came from, just to be able to give you a route and a road. Notch on the tree, and a small one on top and a long one on the bottom. And all of that. That all came from how to get across the Appalachians. And it's still that way. You go back there, stuff grows at a rate. I mean, it's all brush, but.
Well, before we get too far down this path.
Sorry,
I'm interested in the California Four-Wheel Drive Association Sierra Trek, because you have such a history. I mean, Chris and I are following you and helping out, but what's the story with Sierra Trek? How did it start?
Early on, the California Association was the California Association of Jeep Clubs, and you had to be a Jeeper, own a Jeep, and you had to be in a club. There were no individual members, and you couldn't have anything but a Jeep. So for years, that was how it was. They needed to make some more money, and there were several very active Northern California clubs that got together and wanted to do a fundraiser in the summertime that wasn't on the Rubicon. And so the gentleman who was, and another person who's in the Off-Road Motorsports Hall of Fame, Ed Dunkley, said, hey, let's see if we can find something here. They started over in Grouse Ridge at a place called Rock Lake, and the first 2 Sierra Treks were held there. And then that area became roadless. The hope was from the people who wanted it that it was going to become an actual wilderness area, but all they got was roadless area. But that made it virtually impossible for us to do an event there. Meanwhile, they had been trying to do routes from there or in that area to other places. Well, Ed Dunkley had found a friend that ran the Hennis Pass route every year with the Hennis Pass Association. He made friends with a guy who was the head of NID, which is Nevada Irrigation District. And they talked about this place called Meadow Lake, and one thing led to another, and Ed said, well, let's see if we can find a way to get from Cisco Grove to Meadow Lake. Oh, there is an old route. Oh, it goes through what's now Fordyce Lake. Can't get across that because that was the actual route that they use more so than the route we use. Oh, there's another route that follows this Fordyce Creek. Let's go figure that one out. So in the 3rd year, they made it almost to Windshield 5 and camped down below that. And
how long ago was that, Jim?
That would have been 69.
Okay.
They camped below it and then went the next morning up the hill and went to Meadow Lake. From there, every year, except for the 1 year that we were down, 2 years that we were down at the other end, it's been at Meadow Lake. And Meadow Lake has a whole mining history. It was dammed to create water for hydraulic mining, which we'll talk about in a while. But Meadow Lake was another place that had been, and it's one of the highest elevation, quote, hard rock gold mines in California, because most of them were in the belt down Jackson, Sonora, Auburn, Placerville, Grass Valley, Downeyville. That was where the really strong hard rock mines were. That was the fold of the earth that created and held that gold. There really wasn't a lot of gold at that summit area. Matter of fact, they never have found marketable gold at that level, but there was a huge town built right there at Meadow Lake. So we decided to run this event every year, and it got more and more popular. I first heard about it sitting in a dorm room at college at Northern Arizona University from a guy who was a member, his family was a member of the Riverside Rough Riders, Hill and Gully Riders, who became Rough Riders. And they had a person in that club named Dick McPherson, and he had come to one of the early Sierra Treks and was just angry as all get out because he didn't realize that you could actually drive to Meadow Lake by going around. So he dropped into the river in his CJ6 and made it in there, got there, and finds Dunkley and's like, man, that was a rough damn road. There's no way people are bringing trailers in there. He's like, well, which way did you come? And figured out that he had actually already done the run at night alone. And so that story hit my dorm room, and I was like, that's up in my part of the country. I need to know more about that. So that was actually two things: my first introduction to Sierra Trek and my really first introduction to Cal Four Wheel because of that.
50 some odd years ago.
Right, well, that would have been 71.
And the magic of Sierra Trek is Jim tells these stories, and Chris and I help when we take the runs and tag along. But these stories and history come out in Sierra Trek of that entire gold country of Northern California, from Grass Valley, Nevada City, all these towns you might hear about, Allegheny, Forest City, Downeyville. They're all part of a Jim Bramham adventure on Sierra Trek and even Winter Fun Fest. Right?
Yep.
So I've been hanging out with Jim on these runs for 20 plus years. And when Jim asked me to do the historic run on Sierra Trek this year, as I mentioned, I was a little bit nervous. I'm like, oh my goodness. I said, Jim, have you got some notes? You got kind of a notebook or some, a bullet point list? He's like, nope, it's all in my head. And I'm like, oh boy, this is going to be fun. But you mentioned Summit City. I mean, and the speculation part of it.
Right.
I mean, there were 2,000 plus or minus people that lived up there, and at Meadow Lake,
Summit City,
Yeah,
right,
okay.
right there. Yeah,
And-
that was the town.
And from what I've read, it's like Hartley didn't have any desire. He was a trapper, and he didn't have any desire to attract people up to his little corner of the world, because he was pretty much a hermit. He lived there year round. He'd snowshoe out in the wintertime. But again, like with Marshall and Sutter, is word got out.
And the only thing that ended that, well, not the only thing, the fact they ran out of gold, but they had built themselves a pretty sophisticated town at 7,200 feet. It has not been, I mean, just in the short time I've been around Sierra Trek, it has not been uncommon to have 50 feet of snow at the meadow where Sierra Trek is held in the middle of winter. I mean, it's crazy that somebody, had lived there. You hear stories about them having a tunnel from house to house, tunnel to be able to get to their mine diggings in the wintertime. It is just crazy. And a lake completely frozen over. I mean, their water supply had to be melting snow. And if you didn't have a pile, I mean, how many cords of wood would it take you to survive in a tent for 6 months buried in snow with absolutely no insulation? I mean, if you didn't put up a little moss on the roof of your tent, man, you had nothing. I mean,
how on earth did they not just go stir crazy?
They were tough hombres.
They were tough, man. They had community things. They'd get together, they had dances and
Wi-Fi was out.
Wi-Fi was out of the question. It's probably what helped them.
They had the hurdy-gurdies.
They had the hurdy-gurdy rooms, yeah. They actually had a boat that ran up and down the lake, man. And paddle steamer, yeah. So there they had the girls at one end of the lake, and yeah, so.
The what? Oh, I see.
An elevated version of the hurdy-gurdy rooms, dance rooms at the end of the lake.
At the end of the lake. So Sierra Trek grew from just that one run, and they would send the group that led that, although it was mostly the true leaders, workers along the trail, were Sacramento Jeepers. They were always trying to make sure that the Capital City Mountain Goats were in the front of the line and could get to camp first, because the goats had volunteered to do all the food. So they would get to camp, they would set up, get the food going, and the rest of the crew show up, set up, boom, there would be food. And as I can tell you from the old goats, it is hard to tell a better story about the food cooked outdoor. Those guys were absolutely cooks. And Tex Texera, who passed away probably 5 years ago, I mean, he was on the very first Sierra Trek and did food for years.
Jim, it went from that single day, basically weekend run, and expanded. Now we got a Friday run. 1993, we started a Thursday run. We had Star Trek, which was the night run on Friday night. So yeah, it's become kind of a part of an ingrained culture in so many off-road families.
And I see the future of Sierra Trek myself, more the historic, the overlanding. We even had a photography run this year.
Right.
Just people that want to go out and find a spot. So it's the Fort Ice Trail and the rock crawling will always be there, but we have a whole new crop of folks that just want to learn the history, and these are the places to do it with Chris and Jim and I, especially with Mr. Bramham.
Well,
You didn't talk about the Empire Mine. I kind of cut in on you.
Oh,
or
well,
something. You're headed that way soon.
soon, yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry.
Well, the three forms of gold mining that really took root in Northern California, as Del said, you had the first folks that showed up, walk up an old stream bed, kick over some rock, and there'd be something glistening. So they'd pick that up, they'd kick another rock, more glistening, maybe grab a pan, a little water, spin it around. Oh, look at that, there's gold in the bottom. That basically placer mining. You're just picking it up where it is. And those folks did not want to tell anybody that you could walk up a river and fill yourself with gold. So they were really trying to keep that quiet, but it didn't last. And so folks showed up here, ways to get that gold separated from that river aggregate grew. They started with panning. They moved to what they call long toms, rocker boxes. There were all kinds of different ways to, and the magic of gold is it's not the heaviest, but one of the heaviest naturally occurring elements. So if you put it in with a bunch of sand or gravel or granite or whatever, it's going to be at the bottom. So by spinning it or running it across a slowly moving water course that keeps the rock moving, the gold will be left. And so that separation, whether you're using a dredge, whether you're using anything, is the idea that gold, even at the smallest flakes, will be at the bottom of your mixture. So, and that's how we will go into another source of gold. But so when that started to play out, people were like, wow, where is this? I mean, where did it come from? Why do we have this? They started working their way up the rivers, and they got up high enough and ran out of gold. And so one would assume that if you were that high and the gold had run out, wow, the mother lode must be around here somewhere. And that term, mother lode, was the idea that there was some gigantic pile of gold somewhere that was just occasionally falling out in these rivers. And so people started digging around the bed, along the edges, and they found that no geology, but up comes the Sierras. It broke off and encapsulated various parts of various rivers and held those ancient ancient gravels either in a side draft or in big pockets or whatever. So they started finding these things, and they would go in, and that's called drift mining, where you're going into the side of a bank, you're in the gravel, the bottom of your mine is bedrock, and everything else is ancient river gravels, and you're digging back in there, and you're finding the same substances, usually richer than what you were finding in the current flowing rivers. Dangerous as all get out, because you're basically in gravel. There's nothing holding that together. So everything had to be shored and multiple shored to hold that all back. And so to this day, drift mining up there still goes on, and it is very profitable, but obviously very dangerous. Well, then they found that, oh, look at this. There's big pockets out here that have bedrock at the bottom and a lava cap over the top, but the inside, and I've always called it an Oreo cookie. You've got the top and the bottom, and in the middle, that filling was ancient river gravels. Ancient river gravels. Blue lead is what it's called, because it actually has a blue appearance. It's called blue lead. And so the blue lead runs all the way across Northern California. It goes up to the Trinity Alps. I mean, it was just an area where it was a period of time where things were moving up and down, got encapsulated. Well, they didn't have D9 cats. They didn't even have dynamite at that time. They were still using, and that's the other thing about the railroad, man. The thing was built without dynamite, man. It was built with just black powder, basically. So how did you get to this, and how did you move it? Well, the greatest mover on earth is water. Natural mover on earth is water, whether it's waves, whether it's flowing water downhill. The most powerful thing, what carved the Grand Canyon, is water. So if you can harness that power in some way, you can use it. Well, they harnessed it by going as high up in the mountains as they could, damming up whatever they could, and building these elaborate flumes and ditches. at a very low percentage grade, because if you got the water moving too fast, it went to work and scoured it out, knocked your stuff out, blew out your canals, blew out your flume. So everything had to be built at 1 to 2%. If you got above that, boom, it'd just keep blowing it out. Like a railroad grade, exactly. So they built these just amazing ditches and flumes, which are still used by PG&E, NID, Pacific. I mean, their water all over is still flows down those ditches.
The dam at Meadow Lake is a good example. 1857, and it was all about transferring water to Allegheny, Graniteville.
Down through Graniteville. And so everybody thinks that lake there where we camped, which is absolutely gorgeous, the Meadow Lake, was there because of the mines that were there. Nope, it was there for the mines all the way down the hill. So they would take this stuff down flumes and get it to the top of the hill above where they found one of these big pockets and put it into hand-riveted pipe. And you can still find this stuff around up there in the Sierras, these pieces of pipe where they just hauled flat sheet and stood up there and heated up rivets and pounded it together and made pipe. And when it got down to the bottom of wherever they were working, they put it into what would be, by no other terms, a giant squirt gun, cast iron squirt gun that was mounted on a pivot, and they would literally just wash down these mountains. And that would flow down, go across a sluice box, which was, again, one of these areas of separation, but the excess would just flow out and go down into the river course below it. And in most cases, that was the South Fork of the Yuba River. Well, that all ended up in Marysville, Yuba City, all the way to San Francisco Bay, and later there were litigation that put an end to that, but it was very successful mining, but it was high maintenance. And you had a lot of problems in the wintertime, freezing, and so on and so forth, but water was king. So in Grass Valley, they determined that there was actual quartz veins in the granite. And I've always called it the cheapest marble fudge ice cream you can buy because the granite was all vanilla. The quartz was these little deals of marble fudge, the chocolate, and within that was often gold. The pressures that it took to create gold were right below that of quartz. So they would, that's what you would, if you find granite with quartz in it, you will probably never find the gold in the granite. You will always find it in the quartz. So even in hard rock mining, you're looking for these pieces of rock that are mostly granite around the edges, and then have quartz, and they take those to a stamp mill and beat them apart into sand, run them across the table, the gold falls out, and away you go. Well, that's what created the Idaho, Maryland, the North Star, the Center, the Argonaut mine that had the big problem in Jackson, all of the mines, and the largest one, which is in Grass Valley, called the Empire. That thing got to 11,000 feet into the ground by the time, and pumped the water from there with Cornish pumps. So, and that's where my grandfather worked, was at the Empire. Ran the head train, which pulled the material up out of the mine, took it over to the stamp mill, or if the muckers down below had determined that it probably wasn't high enough grade, it went straight to the pile.
The muckers made that decision?
Muckers made that decision.
Those are the guys down in the
mine. Slot. You had three groups working the mine. You had the folks that were actually with hand drills at first, and then later with hydraulic or pneumatic drills, drilling in. You had the guys packing it with dynamite or black powder, whatever. It blew up between every shift. And then the muckers were the guys that went in there, okay, just throw that rock in one of those little mine carts that you see, take it out, get it hauled to the surface. They're going to do with whatever they're going to do with it. At the surface, they also did a little bit of the mine shoring, but in hard rock, you have very little mine shoring because you're literally going through solid rock. If you hit someplace that's soft, yeah, you're going to have to do something with it. But that's how they got that done. So you started with picking it out of the rivers. You figured out a way to get it out. You went absolutely hard rock. And an extension of that is right here where we are here in Sacramento. This area was hydraulically mined in a different way by starting at the river with dredges. because all of this is built on ancient American River washdown or alluvial fan.
Is that what those piles?
Those piles out by Prairie City and all of that are piles created by dredges. So they would start at the river, make themselves a big area like a lake, and seal off the backside from the river, and then just take that lake with them out as far as they could, dredging along, picking it up, running it through a sluice or a separator, and just making these piles and piles. When they ran out of water, now they just wait for rain in the spring, start over again. And so when I was a kid, there were 7 large dredges still sitting out south of Prairie City that were just out there falling apart. We'd go out there and play on the damn thing. So then they decided they had to get rid of that, and they were trying to bring one to Old Sacramento just to show it off, but they could never get it loaded.
So for those that are not familiar with the Sacramento area, we're out here in Rancho Cordova, actually probably just right where Metalcloak, this building is. Right. But everything heading to the east, you'll see miles and miles of just large piles of what looks like river rock. That was like what Jim said. It is just they went dredging through, they pulled it up, they cleaned the gold out of it, and they just piled it up. And it's incredible. Folsom Boulevard, the entire thing is lined with 20, 25 foot high piles of river rock.
Well, I actually was coming down here today from Jackson to Sacramento, and I drove through like Slough House and some of that, and I saw what looked like hydraulic mining banks around it. That's what it was, right?
Yep.
The squirt gun, water cannon.
Yeah. Van Vlick's property out there. Yes. Yeah. He did a little bit of that. Wasn't very successful, but felt that was another way to get to the river gravels. That's what they were trying to get for. They'd already looked at all of it that was viewable from the surface. They wanted to get in and dig in and find something else.
So how did all that? Sorry, Dale. Go ahead.
Well, what I saw and what Chris was talking about and Jim, the remnants of what's left behind in today's world, we kind of look at it and go, boy, they just tore up everything looking for gold, and they did, but they weren't. It was a different world then, just like timber harvesting. It was a different world then, and clear cutting and burning and running the redwoods down the coast and the rivers. And today we're spending a lot of time, money, and energy cleaning up some of those areas. But that history, I think, is important for us to keep alive and know about.
Absolutely.
I didn't mean to butt in.
Oh, no. But the coast, like you say, redwood harvesting was isolated to within several hundred feet of any water course for years, because the only way you could get a redwood to any kind of a market, whether it was taking it out and putting it on a ship or cutting it, was to get it into a water course to float it. Then they started building rail lines up there, but still you had to be, and they created what were called steam donkeys to winch these things across the forest floor and actually cut the trees off at a higher level so they could have an angle to drag those trees. But that was all just in that water course. Well, then when trucks and railroad and so on, they could move up the banks. And that's the same thing in Northern California. You see pictures of Grass Valley even when I was a kid, there were hardly any trees in Grass Valley because they'd been used for heat, mine shoring, something. So everything up there is second growth. And then after the Second World War, the demand for timber here in the valley was so great that's what was the second, quote, gold rush of Grass Valley was timber. And so when the mines closed in 1956, and they didn't close because they ran out of gold, they closed because the government set the price of gold lower than the production value. So here's a whole town, a whole series of towns, Jackson, Sonora, all of these towns that had been based on a gold economy for over 100 years. Sorry, you can't sell it to anybody but the government.
What did all your Cornish family members do then?
Died.
Oh.
No. You've got several generations all in the Grass Valley Cemetery.
Right. And I take folks just a quick tour around the Grass Valley Cemetery because my great-grandparents, my great-great-grandparents, my parents are all in that one cemetery.
In Grass Valley.
In Grass Valley. And when you stand on that hill on the top edge of there and look across the town and see the churches and the old buildings that are there and realize how much they wanted that community to survive. And then when you look down and you see all the family plots laid out, and most of them are still to this day are owned by one of the lodges, the Elks, the Masons, the Oddfellows. So they have subsets of that, because that was so important to the mining community in those days. There wasn't life insurance, and there wasn't, anything. There was no welfare system. So, and in the case of my actual grandmother, her father died she was 7 years old. And if he had not had a policy, basically, that he had been paying through one of the lodges, I don't know, they wouldn't have starved for sure, but that's what they survived on, because he wasn't around. And unfortunately, or fortunately, whichever way you look at it, he was from Canada, French Canadian, with Rondeau for a last name. That meant you're not going in the mine. Doesn't make any difference that you're married to a Cornish girl and all your kids are half Cornish. You ain't going in a mine. So he was stuck with working other jobs.
Even though he wanted to go down.
Wanted to go down. Sorry, you can't.
Wow.
So, and that was why my great uncle he worked the timber. He worked the oh my goodness gracious. He filed saws later, but foundry, that's the word I was looking for. They had a big foundry in Grass Valley that made, steel parts, iron parts for the mines, and he was fantastic at that. And I still have all his tools from doing all that, setup foundry work.
Oh my goodness.
But he was never allowed to go in a mine because his last name was Rondeau. So,
But before we leave the Empire Mine, tell the story about, was it your grandmother when they shut the mine down?
So the mines only shut down for two reasons. One, the Second World War, and they didn't completely close, but most of the miners were taken and given other jobs. They came back right after the Second World War. Most of the mines reopened either for a long or short period of time. But in 1956, look at it, it's just uneconomical, man. We're going to have to close. The Idaho Maryland had closed, the Golden Center had closed, and finally the Empire closed. And my grandmother said the only good thing about that, besides it put all of my street out of work and everybody that I knew was suffering from not knowing what the future was going to be, was that she could finally put her little porcelain salts and knickknacks up on her cases to be able to see them, because otherwise every 12 hours they would blast in the mines right under the house and shake everything off the walls. So she was so happy to have the ability to display all these things, that some of that stuff came originally Cornwall, England, and so on, that she was never able to display. She could use it on the table while you were eating, but couldn't put it on display.
Were the stamp mills running
24 hours a day?
Did they vibrate?
Vibrate the town, shake the town. The Empire only shut them off once for the Bourne. That was the family that owned the mine originally, that in the Bourne house that's there. Mm-hmm. Their daughter got married, and he didn't want to interrupt their marriage or their slight honeymoon they were going to have there. So he shut the stamp mills off for 3 days. And by war declaration or order from the government to shut them down for a while. Other than that, those stamp mills at the Empire, but there were stamp mills all over. Every mine had, something small, something big, something bigger, something big. And
so 2 points. One, you talked about the blasting underneath your grandmother's house, right? If you go into the Empire Mine, they have a diorama of the mine. You said 11,000 feet deep. That's 2 miles. But outside of that, they had numerous levels of shafts going everywhere. So there are like hundreds of miles of shafts splintering through underneath the town everywhere, Grass Valley, Nevada City. If you look at that, it's absolutely incredible to think about the amount of industry and energy and investment in the speculation of mining. Of course, by that time, they had figured out it actually was a producing mine, unlike Summit City. Right. But that's incredible. The other thing I wanted to mention, Jim, is that you touched on this, the railroad in 1869, but all of the equipment that came prior to the completion of that railroad had to come like
around the Horn,
around the Cape, around the Horn or across the Isthmus of Panama. Right. And it wasn't just like a roll in the coals and sail up the coast, motor up the coast. They had to go out to the Sandwich Islands to get to San Francisco.
Right. You had to go clear out in the Pacific to be able to catch the trade winds to be able to get to there. And clipper ships were king, man. That was the fast, tall ships and not a lot of freight, but it was fast enough that it would pay. But the fantastic pictures are them unloading those large engines and so on off of ships in San Francisco with block and tackle. I don't know if you've seen any of these pictures. I mean, you have a complete railroad engine on a ship. You get the thing to harbor. How do you get that off? You don't just fire it up and drive it off. You can't build a ramp to drive it off. I mean, they literally came up with huge yard arms or something that went out over these ships and hand block and tackle with like 500 runs of rope to lift those big Baldwin locomotives off and set them down. Because without a locomotive, I mean, you can build something out here. And one of the things that the West Coast does not have is iron. There's not an iron producing mine anywhere on the West Coast of the United States. The nearest steel is in Monterrey, Mexico, or nearest iron. And so almost the entire Golden Gate Bridge is built with Monterrey steel. And so steel was as valuable as anything. And so it just, the foundries, all of that, they needed steel. Wow. Studebaker needs steel.
So let's, real close, I don't know where we are in our timing here, but I want to go back to the hydraulic mining. And you said it ended and you were going to talk about it.
Okay. Again, extremely controversial whether or not you could just wash down your property and put it into a river and wash it downstream. But mining had always had a somewhat destructive attitude to it, and the gold was speaking to the economy. So it finally took a lawsuit against the mines that were operating as hydraulic mines from the farmers and towns in the valley. And Sawyer, who was the judge, decided, you know what? The ancient law principle says you can do anything to your property, but you can't destroy the property of your neighbor. And that is the principle by which hydraulic mining was stopped. It wasn't, people call it the first environmental lawsuit. It had nothing to do with environmental damage. It had to do with you were killing the guys' peach orchards down and making it impossible. And the floods in Marysville, which to this day, I mean, are perilous. I mean, in my lifetime, Marysville or Linda is flooded 3 or 4 times. So, and all of that is based on the debris left over from hydraulic mining. So that's what stopped it. Was it not profitable? No. It was highly profitable, which is why it was so difficult. And they created what they called a debris commission to figure out what to do. And out of that debris commission, they built Lake Clementine, which was supposed to be inundated by Auburn Dam. It's right below the Forest Hill Bridge that runs from Auburn over to Cool. And Lake Clementine, the water flows down, goes up over the top. We used to be able to go 4-wheeling down the end of it and come out the other side of Yankee Jim's. Ponderosa. Yeah. It's a flow over dam. Its idea was that it was going to collect all this debris and then fill up, and that was going to be the end of it. That's what the Narrows Dam on the Yuba River, Albright, does not have a lower outlet because they never felt that it would ever use a lower outlet. It would fill up with debris to a point that it would just be a debris-filled area, and then the river would flow over it. There'd be enough debris captured to hold it back. Well, they've never filled Albright. It has a lot of material in it, but it was never, and there were a whole series of these debris dams built, and they don't offer real flood control because they're flow over dams. So they always have their water going over. You don't capture anything or be able to hold it back. A lot of people were afraid that Albright was going to go in the 1955 flood, the 64 flood, and the 97 flood. But Albright stuck its mud, literally, still there, and you can still boat, so it's not full.
Well, we're about an hour into it, I think. What else would you like to cover before we wrap up?
Oh, wow.
Chris, did you have a question or anything?
Well, yeah, we got loads of questions. I mean, this could go on until our video crew out here is, ready to go to lunch. Yeah. But your involvement, your family's history, I mean, it's all just fascinating stuff, Jim. And I so enjoyed. If people ask me about what trip to go on, I'm like, on Winter Fun, on any of the events that you're doing a historic run, it's like, do the historic run. And the interesting thing is, it's always different. I mean, you'll come up with different information. I videoed your entire presentation on Sierra Trek one time, which I'm really glad I did, because I drew on that heavily a couple of weeks ago. But you told a story about the comparisons between Kennedy and Lincoln a couple of years ago.
The challenges to the United States. Do these things? Is that where I was with that particular one? Yeah, because Lincoln wanted to, and Jefferson both wanted to move us on his manifest destiny and move us out into the rest of the world and make it prosperous for everyone. And Kennedy wanted to do that same thing. Man, we're going to the moon. And I've always loved that quote. We're not doing it because it's easy. We're doing it because it's hard. I mean, we weren't taking the easy way. And of course, the space program was just an extension of the Cold War, but it still was something that gave the United States folks a lot of pride. We were able to do that. We fulfilled a quote dream to get that done. And Lincoln really wanted to get that done, get us back together. He wanted to use the open spaces of America to bring us back together after the Civil War. So I don't know if that was where I was with that, because
if I remember, there were some other parallels about the dream that they had, the goal that they were both assassinated. They both never saw what they wanted. Or what they dreamed of, or what they told the country they should do. They're both assassinated. And what was it? Kennedy's guy was Lincoln, and Lincoln's guy was Kennedy. I mean, there were all kinds of different parallels in that. But man, it's been a while since I reread my Lincoln history. Yeah. Oh. I just, you got such a vast experience. I was wondering if there's advice that you can give other people that are just getting into the sport, that are just getting into history or overlanding.
You have so much information available now that was never available 10, 15 years ago through social media and so on. And we have government policies that just keep piling one on top of another. It's not, back in the day, they called it spit and whittle. You would go with a person from the Forest Service, you'd sit on a log and you'd spit and you'd whittle and you'd talk about what should be done with this piece of property or that piece of property, and that's what would happen. Well, then we got the Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act, and all these environmental regulations. And so now we spend more time with those things. To learn all of those documents is nearly impossible. So to me, if you're just starting out with this thing, you need to align yourself with what you recognize as truth-telling sources that aren't in some way exaggerating what's going on, but are certainly guiding you toward what it is you need to know to help with land use. And helping with land use isn't that you need to be at every meeting or do all these things or know all the answers, but to support the organizations that do support land use, but everywhere you can seek that information and compare it. I mean, it's an educational process like anything else. Is that true, or is that true? And you need to work through those things. And there's guidance to do that. But involvement in these organizations will draw you toward the most current topics, the way you can help, and you'll be guided to do that.
But what about this on the exploration side? Somebody that just getting into it, that joined an organization, they want to see some stuff.
Old maps, I know there's lots of map tech out there available, but old paper maps to me still are the way to figure out where things were and where they're lined out and where you're still able and legal to go, and be able to search out some of those. Or there seems to be always somebody that's given a trip across Hennis Pass, or a trip that follows the Pony Express, or Gold Country trip, or whatever. Take some of those, learn the basics of where you are, what you're doing, and with those comes the safety in numbers. Dell does a lot in Death Valley. Death Valley is not a place you want to be by yourself, broke down or not oriented, because it can come up on you pretty quickly. But the ability to go and see a lot of this history, a lot of these things, and experience not only the geology but the history, human history in the Death Valley, is just phenomenal. And that's what we've tried to do with Cal 4-Wheel with these. And it's not just the events that I lead, but they do these at other events around the state, where they try to get out and do some historic context of where we are, what we're doing.
And I think that's the key message for me today. And one of the reasons we did this is to encourage you to get involved with your organizations and these runs with Jim and Chris, Dell, whomever, that have some historical value, see stuff you've never seen before. I stood on a bluff on my little run in Jim's stead, and I'm looking at 100 miles of scenery, the Sierra Buttes, and I'm thinking, how do these miners figure out where to stop and start digging? I mean, it just puts you in perspective.
They just looked at the map on their phone and said, "Oh yeah, there's gold right there. Let's go over that way."
We're going to wrap this. We're going to wrap this up. We've mentioned some organizations: American Sand Association, California 4-Wheel Drive Association, Off-Road Motorsports Hall of Fame. Pick an organization or two that you like, be a part of that, and find some runs, some events where you can learn something. And if you get a chance to go with Jim Bramham, probably next year we'll be doing this, and Chris and I will tail gun for him, fill in, ask you questions, banter, whatever. We're going to throw out a huge special thank you to Metalcloak.
Absolutely.
The whole team is here with us, and obviously I'm on the Metalcloak team. Without the assistance, we wouldn't be able to do this video. It's just incredible, and we thank the staff and the crew and the Metalcloak heroes that help us. Any last minute comments?
No, I just appreciate the opportunity to be here. I could do this all day.
And we could do this all day. Jim, I want to say thanks. It's always just an awesome pleasure listening to the encyclopedic mind that is carried within your skull.
Well, thank you guys for filling in, not only for filling in for me, but being here for all these kinds of things. I mean, my first memory of Chris was on a Barrett Lake run, and we'd had a little problem at the river crossing there and on 4th of July Creek, and it was like important that we went back and fixed that. And so Chris was all about that. Now there's a bridge across that, so that was and that was when he was about 16, I think.
I think so.
Yeah, maybe 2 years ago.
So once again, I'm going to wrap this up. That we literally could go on all day. But thank you for joining, Chris, Jim, and Dell. We hope to see you on the trail.
Thank you.
Don't forget, Jim's a great cook too.
Oh my God.
Flamethrower nachos.
Yeah.
You didn't even get into the commission tours.
Oh, God, the commission tours. Yeah, exactly.
Flamethrowing nachos. You ever heard of that?
Flamethrowing nachos.
Were you?
So